my daughter-in-law Susan slept with my husband Mark. It happened a week before the divorce papers. I pretended I knew nothing. At the lawyer's office, they gave me papers. The document denied all of my rights. I smiled. What I did next shocked everyone in the room. It was an afternoon in Montana. The September sun fell softly on my dining room. I set the table with my old china, cream-colored plates I had saved for decades. At 61, I still believed in tradition. I wanted a home that felt warm, but my house had become too quiet. The walls carried echoes of laughter, long gone. Now, silence pressed against me like heavy snow. Mark, my husband of 40 years, grew distant. He always found reasons to work late, or locked himself away in his study. Brian, my only son, rarely came by anymore. His world revolved around Susan. She once called me Mom with a smile. Now her visits felt cold and forced. That morning, the phone rang without warning. It was Sage, Susan's older sister. Her voice trembled as she asked to meet. "Just the two of us," she said quietly. Something in her tone unsettled my heart. Still, I told her to come by. I laid out the linen tablecloth carefully. I sliced lemon cake she loved at Easter. I thought sweetness might ease her worry. The doorbell rang sharp against the silence. I opened it and found Sage on the porch. Her makeup was smudged from hidden tears. She clutched her purse tightly to her chest. Her eyes begged me for safety and truth. "Thank you for seeing me," she whispered faintly. I led her inside to the dining room. Her shoulders shook, though she sat gracefully. I poured hot tea into 2 cups, but her hands stayed clenched on her lap. "What is wrong, dear?" I asked softly. "You look like you have seen a ghost." She raised her gaze and met my eyes. And in that moment, my blood ran cold. Pain, guilt, and a desperate kind of love. "It is about Susan and Mark," she said. The world tilted, but I stayed still. "What about them?" I asked with calm. "They are together," she whispered with breaking voice. "They are more than family." Her words tumbled like water from a broken dam. I saw them at a cafe near his office. They were holding hands like young lovers. They kissed as if nothing else existed. Each word sliced into me like frozen wind. 40 years of marriage. A son I raised with love. A daughter-in-law I welcomed as family. All collapsing in one cruel breath. "Are you certain?" I asked again. Though my heart already knew the answer. She nodded with tears in her eyes. I confronted Susan, but she laughed at me. She said it was none of my business. She said I was old and boring. She said Mark deserved better than me. Her words settled like ash after fire. For a moment, I could not breathe. I stood slowly and walked to the window. Outside was the garden Mark and I planted. The roses were in bloom with red petals. Everything looked peaceful above the soil, but underneath the roots were rotting. "What will you do?" she asked gently. I turned back, and she saw my eyes. She leaned back, startled by what she saw. "I will do nothing," I answered softly. "Not yet." "Nothing," she asked with wide eyes. "I will smile and stay the devoted wife. I will let them believe they are winning." "Some games require patience," I told her, "and I have been patient for a long time." The clock ticked loud in the quiet room. The china plates gleamed untouched on the table. I sat down and poured myself more tea. My hands no longer trembled as before. In that moment, something shifted inside me. I was no longer only a quiet wife. I had become a woman with a weapon. And they had no idea what awaited. Stay with me until the very end. Type in the comments your city or state. Let us see how far this story reaches. And remember, the ending matters most. My name is Alice. I am 61 years old. I live in Montana in a quiet town. This house has been mine for 30 years. I raised my son Brian here. I planted every rose bush with Mark. I used to think this house was forever. Now I am not so sure. Mark is my husband of 40 years. But lately, he feels like a stranger. Brian is my only son. I love him with all my heart. And Susan is his wife. She once called me Mom. Now she barely hides the distance in her eyes. 2 days before the lawyer's meeting, life still looked normal on the surface. The morning sun touched the curtains in my kitchen. Montana's skies stretched wide beyond the window glass. I brewed coffee in the old machine. The smell filled the air with warmth. I sat at the table alone. The chair across from me stayed empty. Mark no longer joined me for breakfast. He always claimed work or tiredness. But I noticed his phone always close. I noticed the way he avoided my eyes. I ate toast, slowly staring at the wall. The silence of the house felt heavy. I thought of Brian as a child, running through the yard with a wooden toy. I remembered birthdays with balloons and cake, Christmas mornings with stockings by the fireplace. Those memories were sharp, almost painful, because they reminded me what was gone. I rinsed my cup and looked outside. The roses were blooming bright and red, but I knew roots could rot unseen. And so could people. Later that afternoon, I prepared the dining room. Sage had called with an urgent request. She wanted to speak with me privately. Her voice trembled when she asked to come. I agreed, though my chest felt tight. I suspected what she wanted to say. Still, I set the table carefully. I wanted to keep dignity in place. I chose the cream-colored linen tablecloth, the same one from countless family gatherings. I sliced lemon cake for her arrival. I arranged cucumber sandwiches on a small plate. I poured fresh tea into porcelain cups. Everything looked ready, perfect, almost festive. But inside, I was far from calm. The clock ticked loud against the wall. Each second pressed like a weight in my chest. I folded napkins twice, just to stay busy. I polished silver that already gleamed. My hands trembled, no matter what I did. Through the open window, I heard a truck. It rattled down the country road nearby. The sound reminded me of Montana winters. The snowstorms, the long nights, the isolation. Would I spend my years alone? Or worse, surrounded by betrayal under my roof? When the doorbell rang, I startled. I wiped my hands on the apron. Sage stood on the porch with weary eyes. Her makeup was smudged as if from crying. She clutched her purse like it might protect her. Her shoulders slumped under an invisible weight. I welcomed her inside with a steady smile. But inside, I felt dread rising. We sat at the dining table together. The untouched food lay between us like ceremony. I poured tea into her cup. Her hands never lifted it. Her knuckles stayed white, fingers clenched tight. "What is wrong, dear?" I asked gently. "You look like you have seen a ghost." She looked up and her eyes told everything. Pain, guilt, a desperate kind of love. "It is about Susan and Mark," she said. The world shifted, though I stayed still. "What about them?" I asked evenly. "They are together," she whispered with broken voice. "They are more than family." Her words hit me like an icy wind. "I saw them at a cafe," she said. "Near Mark's office, sitting close, holding hands, kissing like young lovers." I listened without flinching, though my heart cracked. 40 years of marriage weighed in silence. My son's wife, my husband, both tearing my life apart. "Are you sure?" I asked again, though I already knew in my bones. She nodded and tears slid down her cheeks. I confronted Susan, she said. Susan only laughed. She said it was not my business. She said I was old and boring. She said Mark deserved better. The words settled like ash after fire. I could not breathe for a moment. I stood and walked to the window. The roses outside glowed bright in the sun. Everything looked alive above the soil. But I knew what hid beneath. What will you do? She asked softly. I turned and she saw my eyes. She leaned back, startled by the strength there. I will do nothing, I said quietly. Not yet. Nothing, she asked in disbelief. I will smile. I will stay the devoted wife. I will let them believe they are winning. Some games require patience, I told her, and I have been patient a long time. The clock ticked louder in the stillness. The food on the table stayed untouched. I poured myself tea with steady hands. My trembling had vanished. Something inside me had shifted forever. I was no longer only a quiet wife. I had become a woman with a weapon. And Mark and Susan had no idea. 3 days after Sage told me the truth, I hosted our usual Sunday dinner. The house smelled of roast beef and carrots. The table was set with my silverware shining. I told myself to stay calm, to watch, to listen, not to react. When the door opened, Susan entered first. Her smile wide, her voice bright as bells. Alice, you look wonderful, she said warmly. She wrapped her arms around me in a hug. Her perfume filled the air, sweet and sharp. The same scent I had smelled on Mark's shirts. Thank you, dear, I answered with steady voice. Brian should be here soon. Would you like some wine? That would be lovely, she said quickly. She crossed her legs and settled at the table. Actually, she added, I was hoping to chat. Just us girls before the others arrive. My hand stayed steady as I poured wine, but my heart beat faster with each second. Of course, I said. What is on your mind? She leaned forward, voice gentle, eyes calculating. I worry about you, Alice. About you and Mark. The audacity almost took my breath away. Here was the woman destroying my marriage, pretending concern for my happiness. Why would you worry? I asked softly. She tilted her head, lowering her voice. You two seem so distant lately. At family gatherings, there is tension. Marriage can be difficult after so many years. She placed her manicured hand over mine. A gesture meant to look kind, but I felt the chill beneath it. I nodded slowly, pretending to consider. Yes, we have had a rough patch. Her eyes lit up with hidden satisfaction. She tried to hide it behind sympathy. Have you thought about counseling? She suggested. Or maybe it is time to think about what makes you both happy. You mean divorce? I asked carefully. I am not saying that, she replied quickly, but her face glowed with excitement under her mask. I just think life is too short, she continued with her softest voice. Too short to stay in an unfulfilled marriage. You deserve happiness, Alice. I smiled at her words, a smile that looked grateful, but inside I was memorizing every lie. Brian would want both his parents happy, she added, even if that meant apart. And honestly, Alice, you are still attractive. Surely many men would want someone like you. I nodded, eyes lowered. That is very thoughtful of you, Susan. Inside my chest, the fire burned steady. Her trap was laid so neatly. The front door opened then. Brian walked in, smiling, coat in hand. The air shifted instantly. Susan became the doting wife. She laughed at his jokes, touched his arm constantly, her eyes bright with the love she performed. I watched her closely. When she thought no one noticed, her gaze drifted toward the driveway. Minutes later, Mark arrived late as usual. Sorry I am late, he said. Long day at the office. His voice sounded smooth, too practiced. He leaned down and kissed my cheek. But his eyes found Susan's across the table. For just a moment too long. Brian began talking about their vacation plans. Susan's voice softened as she described tropical beaches. Somewhere warm, she said. Somewhere to escape from everything. She glanced at Mark as she said escape. My stomach turned, but I smiled politely. That sounds wonderful, I told them gently. Young people like you deserve a break. We ate dinner as though nothing was wrong, but I watched closely every glance, every nervous movement. When Brian and I cleared the dishes, Susan and Mark stayed at the table. Their voices dropped low and urgent. I strained to hear. We cannot keep doing this, Susan whispered. Not much longer, Mark replied. She suspects something, Susan pressed. She does not know anything, Mark answered firmly. They were wrong. I knew everything. I hummed softly as I loaded dishes, my face calm, my movements steady. But inside, I built a silent strategy. That week, I made an appointment, not with a family lawyer Mark trusted, but with a woman in town named Patricia. She was sharp, direct, with eyes that saw through masks. I explained my situation to her slowly. She listened, her expression serious. Why have you not confronted your husband? She asked carefully. Because I want to know the truth first, I told her with steady voice. I need to understand the law. The house, the savings, the family business. Most importantly, the trust my grandfather created. I needed to know what protections were hidden. Patricia studied the documents I brought. Your grandfather was wise, she said firmly. There is a clause here about adultery. If a marriage ends for that reason, the innocent party keeps the trust assets. The offending party loses all claims. Hope stirred in me for the first time. So if I prove his affair, everything stays with me. She nodded with confidence. Mark has no idea about these terms. He thinks this is a normal divorce. I left her office lighter than before. They thought they were playing chess. But they did not know all the pieces. That night, I prepared dinner again. Mark joined me at the table. He smiled too widely, asked about my day with fake interest. He kissed my forehead goodnight, the same lips that touched Susan. But I saw the cracks in his mask, his guilt pressed against his arrogance. Maybe she is right, I said gently. Maybe we should consider our options. He turned toward me, eyes narrowing. What do you mean, Alice? I smiled. Just a thought. After that dinner, I could not sleep. The words of Susan echoed in my mind, her soft voice pretending concern for me, her hidden glances toward my husband. I lay awake beside Mark in silence. His breathing was steady, but it felt false. The ceiling above me carried cracks of time. I traced them like a map of my life. And then memories began to surface. Moments I had ignored, signs I had dismissed. I remembered last Christmas. The house decorated with lights and garlands. Brian and Susan arriving late arm in arm. Mark greeted them with unusual warmth. He poured Susan a glass of wine first. He laughed at her jokes louder than usual. I thought it was nothing then. Just holiday cheer, I told myself. But now I saw it differently. The way his eyes lingered on her. The way she leaned too close to him. Even as I carved the turkey, I felt something cold in my stomach. I remembered our anniversary dinner. 40 years of marriage celebrated in silence. He had forgotten the date until morning. He came home late carrying flowers. Not roses from our garden, but lilies, Susan's favorite. I asked why lilies, not roses. He said the shop had no roses left. I accepted the answer, smiled weakly. But in my heart, I knew. I remembered Susan's birthday last spring. Mark insisted on buying her a necklace. He said it was from both of us, but I never saw the receipt. I never saw him buy anything for me. I wore the same pearl earrings for decades. He never noticed them anymore. But when Susan wore the necklace, his eyes followed her every move. I thought of Brian, my sweet boy who once clung to my hand, the boy who whispered goodnight prayers by my bed. He trusted both his parents. He loved Susan with devotion. He did not see the shadow between them. Or maybe he refused to see. I could not bear the thought that my son's wife and my husband were weaving a lie under his roof. The signs stretched back further. 3 years ago, after Mark retired early, he claimed he was helping Brian with finances. I noticed Susan visiting more often, bringing papers, talking in low voices with Mark. When I entered the room, they stopped. They smiled too wide, changing the subject too quickly. I told myself they were planning surprises. Maybe something kind for me. But nothing ever came. No gift. No surprise. Only silence. One night, 2 summers ago, I woke to find the bed empty. I wandered through the house calling softly. Mark was not in the living room. Not in the kitchen. I found him outside on the porch, phone pressed to his ear. His voice, low, tender, almost youthful. When he saw me, he ended the call. Said it was just work, a late-night call from an old client. I believed him, because I wanted to believe. Now I knew better. I walked through the house with heavy steps. Each room carried echoes of a false life. The living room where we once danced. The dining room where we once laughed. The garden where we once dreamed. All poisoned now. Every memory stained with betrayal. I paused at the fireplace mantel. The family portrait hung there proudly. It was taken 5 years ago. Our 40th anniversary. Mark stood tall beside me smiling. Brian and Susan flanked us radiant. We looked like a perfect family. But even then I remembered Mark's hand resting awkwardly. Not on my shoulder, but brushing closer toward Susan's side. I had laughed it off, told the photographer to hurry. Now the photograph mocked me. I sat at the table again, spread old letters and receipts before me, bank statements, checks I had written for Brian and Susan. At first, small amounts. A new fridge for their house. Help with college tuition. But over time, the numbers grew. Thousands for a kitchen remodel. Tens of thousands for vacations abroad. Even the wedding venue years ago. I had paid nearly all of it. I thought I was helping my family. I thought generosity built love. But instead, it made me their bank. Their quiet provider, not their respected elder. The evidence stacked in front of me. Every canceled check felt like betrayal. The phone rang again, sharp and loud. I startled, heart pounding. It was Susan. Her voice sweet as honey. Alice, I just wanted to thank you. The dinner was wonderful. Brian and I are so grateful. Her words dripped with politeness. But I heard the edge beneath them. She added quickly, Mark's parents promised a honeymoon gift. But times are hard. They cannot pay. Would you be willing to help? Just a little more. A trip to Hawaii would mean so much. I gripped the phone tighter, knuckles white. I thought of the roast beef I cooked, the necklace on her throat, the hidden looks across the table. I closed my eyes. I will think about it, I said. Her pause told me she was surprised. Not yes, yes, not this time. I will let you know tomorrow. I hung up the phone with shaking hands. Then slowly, the shaking stopped. For the first time in years, I felt strength rise inside me. I realized generosity had chained me. I had been paying for my own humiliation, but no more. The night was long and heavy. I could not sleep. I stood by the window watching the Montana stars burn bright. The air was sharp with autumn chill. The world felt wide yet empty. I whispered to the darkness. They think I am weak. They think I will never fight. But they do not know me. They never truly did. I pulled the curtains closed, and for the first time in years, I locked the door to our bedroom. Mark knocked softly, asking what was wrong. I answered with silence. He had locked me out of his heart. Now I was shutting the door on him. The morning after Susan's phone call, I sat in the kitchen with black coffee. The house was quiet. Mark had already left for town. I stared at the steam rising from the cup. The taste was bitter, but I needed it. Then my phone rang again. This time it was Sage. Alice, may I stop by? She asked softly. There is something I think you should know. Her tone was urgent, almost fearful. I told her yes, come anytime. Within an hour, her car pulled up. Dust rose from the gravel driveway. She stepped out in jeans and a jacket. Her eyes scanned the house as if wary. I welcomed her in with quiet relief. She carried a folder in her hand. We sat at the dining room table again, the same table where truth had first spilled. Her voice shook. Alice, I could not sleep last night. I have been carrying too much. She slid the folder across the table. Inside were papers, bank receipts, contracts. What is this? I asked carefully. She whispered, Mark and Susan are planning something. They are moving money into another account. I opened the folder with trembling hands. There were checks written to Susan. Large amounts, dates stretching back over a year. They are planning to sell Brian's house, Sage said with a pained look, and transfer the funds into Susan's name. The room tilted around me. My husband, my daughter-in-law, both betraying not only me, but my son as well. Why are you showing me this? I asked, eyes fixed on hers. Because it is wrong, she said firmly. Susan does not deserve Brian. And she is destroying you too. Her voice cracked. I could not keep quiet anymore. I closed the folder slowly. My heart pounded, but my face stayed calm. Do you know what this means, Sage? She nodded. It means they are using you, and they think you will not fight back. I looked toward the window at the garden. The roses swayed gently in the breeze, red petals glowing under the Montana sun. I whispered, they think I am just an old woman. They think I am blind. But they are wrong. Sage reached across the table. Her hand covered mine with warmth. You have more strength than they realize, Alice. You raised Brian on your own heart. You built this home with your own hands. Tears burned in my eyes but did not fall. For the first time in weeks, I felt someone truly on my side. Thank you, I said quietly. I will not forget this. She nodded. And one more thing, she added. I saw Susan with Mark again last week, at the same cafe near his office. They were whispering, passing papers between them. Her voice grew sharp. It was not only an affair, Alice. It is money. It is property. They are building a future without you. I clenched my fists beneath the table. So that was the plan. To erase me from the family and strip me of everything I had built. Later that evening, Brian stopped by. He carried a bag of groceries, smiling. Hi, Mom. He said I thought you could use these. I hugged him, my heart breaking silently. He was innocent. He still trusted Susan fully. We sat together over tea. He told me about work, about neighbors. He laughed, rubbing his tired eyes. I asked gently, How are things between you and Susan? He hesitated only a moment, then forced a smile. Good, Mom. She is busy, but good. I saw the flicker of doubt in his eyes, but he pushed it away quickly. Brian, I said softly, if you ever need me, no matter what, I am here. He looked at me curiously. Of course, Mom. Why would you even say that? I just smiled, because sometimes life changes fast. Faster than we think. After he left, I sat alone again. The house quiet, the night deep. I opened the folder Sage had given me. I studied every paper, every number. Each receipt was proof. Each transfer was a betrayal. I stacked them neatly in order. My heart no longer shook. I knew what I had to do. That night, Mark came home late. He set his briefcase down quietly. Long day, he muttered. Work, you know how it is. I looked up at him calmly. Yes, I know. He studied me for a moment. Maybe he saw the shift in my eyes. Maybe not. Either way, I had changed. I was no longer blind. I was no longer their silent provider. I had an ally. I had proof. I had patience. And soon I would have justice. The morning after Sage's visit, I felt a new stillness in my chest. I was no longer stumbling in the dark. I now held light, even if small. Mark left early as always. His briefcase in one hand, his phone in the other. He kissed my cheek on the way out. His lips cold, his eyes looking past me. I watched from the window as he drove away. The gravel crunched under the tires, the dust rising behind him. When the road grew quiet again, I picked up the folder Sage had given me. I slid it into a larger envelope, then locked it in the old cedar chest at the foot of my bed. That chest had held quilts once. Now it held my future. I dialed Patricia, the lawyer I trusted. Her voice was steady, direct, without judgment. Bring everything you have, she said. And do not let them see it. That afternoon, I drove into town. The Montana sky stretched wide and pale. Golden fields rolled endlessly on both sides. My hand stayed firm on the wheel. For the first time, I felt control. At Patricia's office, I spread the papers. She scanned them quickly, eyebrows narrowing. These transfers are irregular, she said firmly. If proven, they show intent to defraud. And this trust clause still protects you, Alice. As long as adultery and mismanagement are proven. I nodded slowly, absorbing every word. We can use this, I said. But timing must be careful. She agreed. Silence can be more powerful than shouting. That evening, I returned home. Mark was in the living room. Susan was there too, helping Brian with bills. I greeted them calmly, smiling gently. Would anyone like tea? I asked. No thanks, Susan said quickly. She glanced at Mark, then back at Brian. I studied her without blinking. Her face flushed faintly, her hands restless. She looked away, and I knew she felt my eyes on her. Later, after they left, Mark sat across from me at the table. Alice, he began carefully, the lawyer will need you tomorrow. Just to sign a few forms. What kind of forms? I asked. Nothing big, he said too quickly. Routine papers about property. I looked at him calmly, then nodded with a smile. Of course, I said. But I would like a copy first. He froze for a split second, then forced a laugh. Sure, he said. I stood and poured more tea. Inside, my decision hardened. No more blind signatures. That night alone in my room, I began writing everything down. Dates, times, strange phone calls, Susan's visits when Brian was away. I filled a notebook page by page. each word another stone on my wall of proof. It felt like breathing again, like I was stitching myself back together. The next morning, Susan came early. She entered with a smile too wide. "Alice, I brought you muffins," she said. "Blueberry, your favorite." She set them on the counter sweetly, but her eyes darted toward the table. Mark's papers were stacked neatly there. She pretended not to notice, but I caught the flicker in her gaze. "Thank you, Susan," I said evenly. "You are very thoughtful." "Would you like one?" she asked. "No, thank you. I will save them for later." Her smile faltered for half a breath. When Brian stopped by that evening, I spoke to him gently. "Son, do you ever feel tired?" I asked. "Tired of carrying everything on your back?" He looked at me strangely. "Sometimes, Mom." "Why do you ask?" "Just wondering," I said softly. "Life can surprise us, and we need to be prepared." He nodded slowly, though I could see he did not understand. But one day he would. That week, I began making small changes. I called the bank and updated my accounts. I moved some savings quietly into my name. I visited the county clerk's office, requested copies of deeds and trust documents. I spoke with Patricia twice more, each meeting adding another layer to my armor. At home, I stayed calm. I cooked dinners. I watered the garden. I played the role of the loyal wife. Mark believed me compliant. Susan believed me blind. They were both wrong. One night, as Mark slept, I stood by the window again. The Montana stars burned against the black sky. The air cold, the wind sharp on the trees. I whispered to myself, "Patience is power. Silence is strength." They think they are winning, but I am only waiting. Waiting for the moment when their lies will trap them. And when that moment comes, I will not hesitate. Stay with me through every chapter. Type your city or state in the comments. Let us see how wide this story spreads. And remember, the ending matters most. 2 days later, Mark told me firmly, "Alice, we need to meet with the lawyer." He said it like a routine errand, but his eyes betrayed urgency, almost desperation. Susan was already waiting by the car. Her smile stretched too wide, her hands restless. I carried my purse calmly, heart steady. Inside it, my own secret envelope waited. The drive into town was quiet. Mark tapped his fingers on the wheel. Susan scrolled her phone without looking up. I watched the Montana fields pass by. The wide sky above me gave strength. At the lawyer's office, we sat together. The room smelled of coffee and old books. The attorney, a man Mark trusted, placed a stack of papers on the desk. "Alice, these are simple," he said smoothly. "Property division, retirement accounts, standard procedure." His voice was practiced, almost rehearsed. Susan leaned forward, eyes bright with expectation. I opened the folder slowly. My fingers traced the typed lines. One sentence stopped me cold. "Waiver of rights to spousal property." I read it again, carefully, silently. It was clear. They wanted me to sign away everything. I lifted my eyes to Mark. He avoided my gaze, staring at the desk. Susan leaned closer, her perfume sharp. "Alice, this is best for everyone," she said. "It will make things easier for Brian, too." Her tone was sugar, her eyes hard. I smiled faintly and set down the pen. "I would like to take these home." Mark stiffened. "That is not necessary, Alice. Just sign, we can be done." I shook my head gently. "No, I need time." The lawyer cleared his throat. "Of course, Mrs. Whitfield, you are entitled to review them." Susan's smile faltered for half a breath. Mark's jaw tightened, his hand clenched. I folded the papers carefully into my purse. "Thank you," I said calmly. I will bring them back next week. On the drive home, the silence was heavy. Finally, Susan spoke with forced laughter. Alice, you worry too much. These things are routine. No one is trying to trick you. Her words floated like smoke in the air. Thin, empty, impossible to trust. I looked out the window at the horizon. The mountains rose steady and eternal. They gave me strength. I was not signing anything. That night, Mark confronted me at home. Alice, why are you dragging this out? I turned slowly to face him. Because after 40 years of marriage, I read every word before signing. His face darkened. He tried to soften his tone. This is just business, he said gently. It is nothing personal. I let silence hang between us. Business. That was what our life had become. The next morning, I drove alone. Not to his lawyer, but to Patricia, my own. I laid the papers before her. She scanned them quickly, lips pressed tight. You were right not to sign, she said firmly. These documents would strip you bare. I nodded, calm but trembling inside. What do we do now? She looked me in the eyes. We gather more proof. We let them think you are weak. And when the time is right, we turn their trap against them. Her voice was steady steel beneath kindness. For the first time, I felt truly safe. Back home, I cooked dinner as usual. Brian stopped by to help with repairs. He laughed as he fixed a loose cabinet. Susan praised him loudly, but her eyes strayed toward Mark. I noticed. Every look, every pause. But I kept my face calm, serving food, pouring drinks, playing the part. Inside me, the fire grew hotter. I was no longer only a wife. I was a witness. I was a strategist. That night, as the house slept, I unlocked the cedar chest again. I placed the new papers inside alongside Sage's folder of receipts. The chest was full now. Proof. Dates. Documents. Every piece a weapon waiting its turn. I closed the lid with steady hands. For the first time, I smiled. They thought they were writing my ending. But I was quietly writing theirs. The Sunday after the lawyer's office, I prepared dinner for the family. The table was set with roast chicken, mashed potatoes, corn, and fresh bread. I moved calmly in the kitchen, but inside my mind stayed sharp. Brian and Susan arrived first. They carried a pie from the bakery. Mark came later, his smile too wide, his eyes tired. We sat together around the table. The house felt full again, but also heavy with secrets. Brian began to tell stories from work. He laughed, his eyes bright with pride. Susan smiled, nodding at his words. But she touched Mark's hand under the table. I saw it. A flicker, a glance, a touch too long. Mark pulled his hand away quickly, but not before my eyes caught it. I kept serving chicken, my voice calm, my smile polite. Inside my chest burned with quiet fire. As the meal continued, Susan raised her glass of wine. To family, she said warmly. May we all find happiness even if that means change. Her words froze the air. Brian laughed softly, not noticing. But Mark shifted uncomfortably in his seat. I lifted my own glass slowly. Yes, to family, I said firmly. True family built on loyalty. Susan's smile faltered for a breath. Her hand tightened on the stem of her glass. Later, as dessert was served, Susan leaned close to Brian. We deserve more, don't you think, she said softly, but not softly enough. Her voice carried across the table. I heard every word. So did Mark. Brian looked puzzled. Fork paused halfway to his mouth. More of what he asked gently. Susan laughed quickly, covering her slip. Oh, more vacations, more time together. That's all I meant. But the damage was done. Her mask had cracked. Mark cleared his throat loudly. He changed the subject to football. Brian smiled, talking about his team. But I kept my eyes on Susan. Her cheeks were flushed, her gaze restless, darting toward Mark. For the first time, Brian seemed to notice something strange. He looked between them briefly. Confusion flickered in his eyes. But then he shook it off. He did not want to believe. After dinner, Brian helped me carry dishes to the kitchen. He smiled, but his voice was low. "Mom, is everything okay?" Susan seemed different tonight. I dried a plate slowly. "Sometimes people show their true selves," I said quietly. "You just have to pay attention." He studied me for a moment, then nodded, though uncertainty remained. When Brian left with Susan, Mark stayed behind in the kitchen. "Alice, what was that about?" he asked. His tone sharp, almost defensive. I turned to him calmly. "What do you mean?" "Susan's toast," he said quickly. "Why did you look at her like that?" I smiled faintly. "Because her words were interesting." He opened his mouth, then closed it. He looked away, his hands restless at his sides. The silence stretched long between us. Finally, he muttered, "You read too much into things." Maybe I said softly. Or maybe I finally read them right. That night, alone in my room, I wrote everything down in my notebook. Her words at the table. Her slip about more. The touch of her hand on Mark's. Each detail another thread in my tapestry. Each thread pulling the truth tighter. I placed the notes into the cedar chest. My secret vault of betrayal. The next morning, Sage called again. Her voice tense, almost whispering. "Alice, I saw Susan with Mark yesterday. They were at the bank together." Not Brian. Not business. Just them. My grip tightened on the phone. "Thank you, Sage," I said calmly. "Keep watching." I hung up and stood by the window. The garden glowed under the autumn sun. The roses still bloomed, but winter was coming. And with it, the cold truth neither of them could hide. After that Sunday dinner, I knew I needed proof. Not suspicion. Not whispers. Not slips of the tongue. Proof solid enough to stand in court. Proof no one could deny. The next morning, I met Patricia at her office. I laid my notes on her desk. Every detail I had written in my book. She scanned them carefully, nodding slowly. "This is good, Alice," she said firmly. "But we need more. We need bank statements. We need eyewitnesses. We need anything that ties them together." Her voice was calm but sharp like glass. She slid a small recorder across the table. "Keep this with you," she said. "If they speak openly, capture every word." I placed it in my purse quietly. It felt heavy, not in weight, but in meaning. That afternoon, I visited the local bank. I smiled at the clerk I had known for years. A friendly woman with kind eyes. I asked politely for my account statements. She handed me the folder without hesitation. I studied them in my car outside. The numbers stared back at me cold. Large withdrawals I never made. Checks written in my name. I traced the handwriting. Mark's neat slant, not mine. He had taken from me directly. And Susan had received it. That evening, I found Mark in his study. He was on the phone, voice low-toned, tender. I stood in the hallway, the recorder hidden in my pocket. He said softly, "Don't worry, Susan. She won't know a thing. The papers will be signed soon." My breath caught in my throat. I pressed the button quietly. The device captured every word. When he ended the call, I walked in calmly. "Working late again?" I asked. "Yes," he said too quickly. "Just clients." I smiled faintly. Of course. 2 days later, Sage called me, her voice urgent. Alice, I saw them again, she whispered. At the caf, same booth as before. This time, they weren't careful. They were holding hands openly, passing papers back and forth. I gripped the phone tightly. Did anyone else see? I asked. Yes, she said. The waitress noticed. She told me afterward. Bring her to me, I said. If she's willing, I need her story. That evening, Sage drove the waitress to my home. A young woman with tired eyes. She sat at my table nervously. I poured her tea, my voice steady, kind. I just need honesty, I told her. Nothing more. She nodded quickly. I saw them, she said. Mr. Whitfield and your daughter-in-law. They came in often, always together, always close, sometimes holding hands under the table. One time, she added he kissed her cheek before leaving. The words hit me like a stone, but I kept my face calm. Would you be willing to say this later? I asked quietly. She hesitated, then nodded. Yes, ma'am. I don't like lies. I thanked her softly. Her words were another piece of my shield. That night, I placed the recorder, the bank folder, and the waitress's statement into the cedar chest. The chest was nearly full now, heavy with betrayal, heavy with truth. I locked it and placed the key under my pillow. For the first time in weeks, I slept without trembling. The next morning, Susan called me. Her voice, honey sweet, but her tone edged with control. Alice, we're meeting the lawyer again Friday. It's important you sign this time. I smiled into the receiver. Of course, dear. I'll be there. She sighed with relief. Thank you, Alice. You're making the right choice. When she hung up, I sat in silence. They believed I was surrendering, but really, I was preparing the battlefield. On Friday, I dressed with care. A simple navy dress, pearl earrings I had worn for decades. Mark and Susan arrived to pick me up, both smiling too wide, both certain of victory. As I closed the door behind me, I touched the purse at my side. Inside were copies of everything: bank records, witness names, and the recording of Mark's voice. They thought today would be my ending, but it was only the beginning. Friday morning came cold and bright. I dressed carefully in my navy dress. Pearl earrings glinted against my silver hair. I looked steady, older, but unbroken. Mark and Susan pulled into the driveway, both smiling as if this was victory day. Ready? Alice, Mark asked lightly. Yes, I said calmly. Inside my purse rested my quiet weapons. Bank records, receipts, the recording of his voice. We drove into town in silence. The wide Montana sky stretched above us. They thought this was my defeat. I knew better. At the lawyer's office, the same man greeted us politely. Come in, Mrs. Whitfield, he said. Let's finalize everything today. Susan's eyes glittered with triumph. Mark's hand pressed on my back gently. I sat at the long oak table. The papers waited in neat stacks. The lawyer cleared his throat. All we need is your signature, Alice. He slid the pen across the desk. Susan leaned forward, eager breath quick. I looked down slowly. Waiver of rights to marital property. The same trap written in fine print. I lifted the pen in my hand. I held it steady above the paper. Then I set it down again. I looked directly at Susan first. Her smile froze on her lips. Then I turned to Mark. His jaw tightened, his eyes narrowed. No, I said softly. Not today. The lawyer blinked in surprise. Mrs. Whitfield, it is only procedure. No, I repeated, my voice calm but firm as stone. I will not sign this. The silence was sharp. Susan shifted in her seat. Mark leaned forward, his voice low. Alice, stop making this harder. We agreed this is best. Best for who, I asked quietly. Susan's voice sharpened. For all of us, Alice. For Brian, for the family. I tilted my head, studying her. Her mask cracked under my silence. Family built on betrayal, I whispered. That is not family at all. Mark slammed his palm on the desk. The sound echoed through the office. Alice, you are being unreasonable. Just sign the papers. I leaned back in my chair slowly. My calm smile unnerved him more than anger ever could. If you want me to sign, I said softly, then I will take them home. And my lawyer will read them first. Susan gasped, eyes wide. Your lawyer, she repeated sharply. Yes, I answered simply. My lawyer. Mark's face drained of color. He leaned back in his chair, his confidence slipping. The lawyer cleared his throat nervously. Of course, Mrs. Whitfield, that is your right. Susan opened her mouth to argue, but Mark shot her a warning glance. I gathered the papers into my purse. My hands steady, my heart steady too. I stood slowly, my chair scraping softly against the floor. Thank you for your time, I said. I will return them when I am ready. Then I turned and walked to the door. My heels clicked against the wooden floor. Each step echoed with finality. In the car, silence hung heavy. Susan fidgeted, glancing at Mark nervously. She whispered, she knows. She has to know. Mark hissed under his breath. Shut up. Do not say another word. I stared out the window, the golden fields rushing past. My reflection in the glass looked calm. But inside, fire burned steady and cold. That night at home, Mark tried again. Alice, please, why are you dragging this out? I met his gaze without fear. Because I am not blind. His face hardened, but he said nothing more. He turned away, and for the first time, I felt taller than him. I returned to my room. Opened the cedar chest one more time. Inside lay the papers, the receipts, the recording, the statements. Proof stacked like bricks. A wall of truth waiting to fall. I touched the lid gently. Soon, I whispered, very soon. The week after the silent showdown, I asked Patricia to meet me again. Her office smelled faintly of cedar and ink. I placed the old family trust on her desk. She turned the pages with practiced hands. Her eyes paused on one paragraph. Here it is, she said firmly. Your grandfather's protection clause. I leaned closer, my hands trembling slightly. Read it to me, I whispered. She nodded. If a marriage ends due to adultery, the innocent spouse retains full control. The offending spouse forfeits all rights to property, trust, or inheritance. Her voice was calm, but my heart pounded. The words felt like a shield across my chest. So if I prove his affair, I asked. She looked at me directly. Then everything remains yours, Alice. That night, I sat by the fire. The flames licked the logs, casting shadows on the walls. I held the trust in my lap, its leather cover worn from decades. My grandfather had written these words. He had known betrayal could come. He had known blood was not always loyal. I whispered softly to the fire. Thank you. You saved me before I even knew. The next Sunday, I invited the family for dinner. Brian came in first, smiling as always. Susan followed, her perfume sharp. Mark arrived last, his face tired. We sat at the table, the roast steaming in the center. Conversation flowed lightly at first. Brian talked about work. Susan laughed too loudly. Mark drank his wine in silence. After dessert, I stood slowly. I carried the leather trust to the table. Susan's laughter faltered. Mark's eyes narrowed. "What's that, Alice?" he asked cautiously. "This," I said softly, "is my grandfather's trust." Susan tried to smile. "Oh, old family papers, how sweet." I placed it flat on the table. Patricia's business card slipped out beside it. Mark froze. He knew that name. I opened the trust to the marked page. My voice was calm, steady as stone. "There is a clause here," I said. "If a marriage ends by adultery, the guilty spouse loses all claims." Susan's face drained of color. Brian looked confused. Mark's glass shook in his hand. "That's an old document," Mark said quickly. "It means nothing now." "No," I answered firmly. "It was updated 15 years ago. Your signature is right here." I tapped the page with my finger. Brian leaned in to look. "Dad, that's your handwriting," he said softly. Susan tried to laugh. "Alice, you're making this dramatic." "There's no proof of adultery." I reached into my purse calmly. I set the recorder on the table. Mark's voice spilled into the room. "Don't worry, Susan. She won't know a thing. The papers will be signed soon." The room fell into silence. Brian's fork clattered onto his plate. He stared at his wife, then at his father. Mark opened his mouth, but no words came out. Susan rose quickly, her face red, her eyes wild. "This doesn't mean anything," she snapped. "It's taken out of context." "Context," I said softly. "The bank statements provide the rest." I slid the folder across the table. Every check, every withdrawal, every dollar transferred into her hands. Brian picked up the paper slowly. His face turned pale as he read, "Dad, Susan." "What is this?" he whispered. Neither of them answered. I sat down again, my hands folded. My voice calm, almost gentle. "I am not shouting. I am not crying. I am not broken. I am only stating the truth. And the truth is enough." Mark lowered his head into his hands. Susan stared at the wall in silence. Brian's chair scraped against the floor. He left the room without a word. The silence left behind was heavier than stone. I closed the trust gently, slid it back into my purse. "This is not finished," I said softly. "But you both know now." Susan's lips trembled, her mask finally shattered. Mark whispered my name once. "Alice?" But I stood my back straight, my resolve stronger than ever. I walked away from the table, each step slow, deliberate, echoing with 40 years of betrayal. The house was quiet after that night. Brian stayed away, his heart broken, his world shaken. Mark barely spoke to me. Susan vanished into excuses and silence. I moved through the room slowly, touching walls that had once held love. Every picture frame felt heavy. Every memory weighed down with betrayal. And yet inside me, there was peace. I met Patricia one last time. She smiled gently across the desk. "Alice, you have everything you need. The trust is yours. The law is clear. Mark cannot take this house. Susan cannot steal your future." I nodded quietly. Relief mixed with sadness in my chest. Victory never feels sweet when it comes from ashes. That evening, I stood alone in the garden. The Montana air was cool and sharp. The roses glowed red in fading sunlight. I remembered planting them with Mark. I remembered Brian running barefoot through the yard. I remembered laughter before lies took root. Now the roses belonged only to me. Mark came to the porch, his face pale, his shoulders heavy. "Alice," he said softly, "we can fix this." "Fix," I repeated quietly. "You cannot fix a heart you broke." He reached for me, but I stepped back. "Susan is gone," he whispered. "Brian won't answer my calls." I looked at him, the man I once loved. I saw not a husband, but a stranger who had traded loyalty for greed and desire. I shook my head slowly. This is the bed you made. That night, I packed a small suitcase. Not because I had to leave, but because I wanted to. Freedom is not in walls or deeds. It is in choice. I left the papers in the cedar chest, locked safe, guarded by time. Then I placed the key into my purse. In the morning, I drove down the gravel road. The sky stretched wide and endless. Mountains rose strong on the horizon. I felt light, as though 40 years of weight had finally lifted. The house grew small in my mirror. But I did not cry. I whispered softly to myself, I am Alice. I am free. Now I ask you this. What would you do if betrayal lived under your roof? Would you fight with anger or walk away with quiet strength? Because sometimes the loudest power is silence. Stay with me until the next story. Subscribe to this channel so you don't miss the twists ahead. Comment your city or state below. Let's see how far these stories travel. And remember, the ending is never the end.